Now, this wasn't necessarily something that Luther or even Calvin emphasized themselves, but the advent of the Reformation brought in really revolutionary wars all across Europe. In fact, in 1524 in Germany, because the birth of the Reformation had challenged the authority and the primacy of the Roman Catholic Church, for many peasants, that also undermined the importance of the German princes, and authorities generally were challenged. So there was a peasants' war in 1524, and tens of thousands of peasants were killed, and it frightened Luther, actually. Not long after, there were the religious wars of religion in Europe, which lasted for at least 30 years, in which 4 million people were killed. So one of the initial consequences of Luther's challenge was that all formal forms of authority were challenged. Now, others who inherited the influence of the Reformation later on were forced, therefore, to reflect on the tension in Europe as a result of the so-called wars of religion. And one of the key figures here was, surprisingly, a man called Oliver Cromwell, who contributed to the cutting off of the head of the English king, Charles I, and he became Lord Protector, or in charge of the government in the UK. He instituted liberal democracy, where Parliament and the rule of law had supremacy over the right of kings, which was the way folks viewed it before. And the consequence of this was the spread of the democratic system and the rule of law from the UK context to many other countries around the world. One of the other factors, though, and that's why Cromwell, incidentally, there's a statue of him outside the Houses of Parliament in Britain, because they see him as the father of modern-day democracy. But it had its roots in the Reformation. The other dimension was that because of the wars that occurred, Cromwell saw the importance of religious toleration. And interestingly, he opened the doors for Jews to return to Britain for the first time for over 300 years. And he even said on one occasion he would be happy for Muslims to come to Britain if they wanted to. And so many people see him as the author of religious toleration. Now, it's important to understand that when Cromwell was thinking of religious toleration, he didn't define religious toleration in the way we do these days. We often confuse the word toleration with relativism and pluralism, the notion that there are many ways to truth, or that the only absolute truth is that there is no absolute truth, everything is relative. Cromwell's concept of toleration was a much stronger concept. What he argued was that when I'm tolerant, you say that, I believe this. I think your view is wrong, but I defend your right to hold that view. I tolerate it. When we understand toleration as pluralism, then our notion often is, you believe that, I believe this, it doesn't matter. It's all the same in the end. So he allowed these other folks to worship in England at the time, because it was his conviction, and this is a key thing about Cromwell after the Reformation, his conviction was that the gospel needs to be proclaimed and biblical truth needs to be applied to every area of society. And when you allow competing voices to speak, that which is true stands out from the rest. So he actually appointed preachers in key cities in Britain to proclaim the gospel in public, in the confidence that when people heard the gospel over other worldviews, that they would be inexorably drawn to the gospel. So they should tolerate the propagation of other worldviews, knowing that in the public sphere, they would be seen to be inferior to the Christian worldview. So in a sense, the Reformation, through the inheritors of Luther and Calvin, led to the spread of educational reforms, the birth of liberal democracy, and the birth of religious toleration.